The large conference hall in New Delhi was filled with quiet excitement. Leaders, business icons, and innovators from around the world had gathered for a special event about India's future in technology. Among them sat Sundar Pichai, and focused, yet with a certain curiosity in his eyes. He had been invited to speak, but what he did not expect was that the Prime Minister himself, Narendra Modi, would share something deeply personal before his turn came. The moment Modi took the stage, the room fell silent. His voice was steady, but softer than usual, as if he wanted to let the audience into a part of his life rarely seen. He began by saying, "When I was a small boy, life was not easy. My family had little, and each day was a challenge. But one winter morning, something happened that stayed in my heart forever." Sundar leaned forward slightly, sensing that this was not a political speech, but a memory from a man's soul. Modi described the cold mornings when he would wake up before the sun, help his father at the tea stall, and then rush to school. One day, he said, his shoes had torn badly, and he could feel the cold ground through the thin soles. "I remember standing outside the classroom, embarrassed to walk in because the other children would see," Modi continued. "But then, one classmate noticed. He quietly walked up to me, took off his own shoes, and gave them to me. He said nothing, just smiled and ran barefoot into the playground. I never forgot that act of kindness." The hall was silent. Soon, eyes softened. He had heard many stories of resilience, but something about this one felt different. It was not just about poverty or hardship. It was about the unshakable kindness that can exist even in the hardest places. As Modi spoke, Sundar remembered his own childhood in Chennai, growing up in a modest home with parents who valued education more than anything else. There had been days when money was short, but people's generosity made those days bearable. What happened next surprised everyone. Modi paused, looked directly at Sundar, and said, "I see that same kindness in you. I have heard stories of how you quietly help others, without asking for credit. Perhaps that is why this memory came back to me today." Sundar was caught off guard. The room's attention shifted toward him, and he could feel the weight of those words. He had not expected the Prime Minister to make such a personal connection, in front of so many people. Inside, Sundar felt a mix of gratitude and humility. He did not like being the center of attention, especially for acts he never spoke about. But there was something about Modi's story that stirred a deep sense of responsibility in him. He thought about the boy who had given away his shoes without hesitation, and wondered if that boy had never done it, would Modi have carried that same belief and kindness throughout his life? As the applause filled the room, Sundar knew this was more than a speech. It was the beginning of a conversation between two men from very different worlds, yet shaped by the same values. What neither of them knew at that moment was that this memory would lead to a series of events. Neither could have predicted events that would test their beliefs, challenge their decisions, and ultimately change the lives of many. Ending line. This was only the first spark, but the fire it would ignite had the power to touch millions. After the event ended, Sundar and Modi found themselves walking side by side toward a private lounge. Outside, cameras flashed. Journalists called out their names, but neither man slowed down to answer. The air was heavy with the energy of what had just been shared, and for a moment, they walked in silence. When they entered the quiet lounge, Modi turned to Sundar and said, "I did not plan to share that story today, but when I saw you sitting there, I remembered the boy from my childhood. I think stories like that are not just memories, they are reminders of the kind of people we should be." Sundar smiled softly. "It was a beautiful memory," he replied, "and it reminded me of something too. When I was a child, my father would always tell me that no matter how far you go in life, never forget the people who made you feel seen when you were invisible." He paused, as if measuring his next words. Sometimes, the smallest acts leave the deepest marks. Modi nodded slowly, but then his tone changed. "There is something I did not say on stage," he admitted. That boy who gave me his shoes, I never saw him again. His family left the town just a few days later. I never had the chance to thank him." He looked down for a moment, his voice carrying a hint of regret. "I have always wondered where he went, and what kind of life he had." Sundar felt an unexpected pull in his heart. There was something about unfinished stories that stayed with him, and this was one of them. "Maybe he's still out there," Sundar said, "and maybe he still remembers that morning." Modi gave a half smile, but there was a weight in his eyes. "I don't know. It's been decades. The world changes. People change. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that some kindness survives time." As they spoke, an aide entered the lounge to remind Modi of his next appointment. Before leaving, Modi placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder and said, "You understand kindness in a way that is rare. Hold on to it. The world needs more of it." With that, he was gone. Sundar stood there for a few moments, replaying the conversation in his mind. The image of a young boy running barefoot into a playground after giving away his shoes would not leave him. Something inside him told him this was not the end of the story. It was a thread waiting to be pulled. That night, as Sundar sat in his hotel room overlooking the city lights, he opened his laptop and began searching. He had no name, no photograph, just the memory of a moment told through someone else's eyes. But Sundar believed that, if an act was pure enough, it left a trail not always on paper, but in the hearts of those it touched. What he didn't know was that his search for the boy from Modi's childhood would uncover truths neither man was ready for. Truths that would connect the past to the present in ways that would test their understanding of kindness itself. Ending line. Sundar thought he was chasing a memory, but what he was about to find could change the course of both their lives forever. The next morning, Sundar woke up early. The winter air in Delhi was sharp, and the faint sound of traffic drifted in through the hotel window. He sat with a cup of tea, staring at the notes he had made the night before. It felt strange. He was the CEO of one of the world's largest companies, yet here he was, chasing a decades-old story about a boy with no name. Still, something in him refused to let it go. Perhaps it was because kindness had always been the quiet thread running through his own life. Or maybe it was because he could see how much it still mattered to Modi, even after so many years. He began calling a few trusted contacts in government and media, explaining the memory Modi had shared. Most people politely told him it would be impossible to find someone after so many decades with so little information. But one elderly journalist listened more carefully. "There was a school near Vadnagar," the man said slowly. "Small place. In the early 70s, it had a teacher who often spoke about an unusual act of kindness among his students. I remember hearing about a boy who gave away his shoes in winter. The story spread among teachers, but the boy's family left soon. After Sundar wrote down every detail, he decided he would visit Vadnagar himself. Something told him this journey could not be done over phone calls and emails. See, it had to be personal. 2 days later, he arrived in the small town where Modi had grown up. It was a world away from the glass towers and busy streets he was used to. Here, the roads were narrow. The air carried the smell of fresh rotis, and children ran barefoot across dusty lanes. He visited the old school first. The building had been renovated, but parts of it still looked untouched by time. The cracked walls, the rusted gates, the sound of chalk against blackboard. An elderly man, the current headmaster, welcomed him. When Sundar explained why he was there, the headmaster's eyes lit up. Double quotes. "Yes," he said quietly. "I have heard this story from my father, who also taught here." The boy's name was Anil. His father worked at the railway station. They were poor, but generous. One winter, they suddenly moved to another city. No one knew exactly where. The name Anil felt like the first real step forward. Sundar thanked the headmaster and stepped out into the fading afternoon light. But as he walked through the narrow streets, he noticed something strange. An old man sitting by a tea stall was watching him closely, as if he knew exactly who he was and why he had come. When their eyes met, the man gave a slow, knowing smile. Sundar felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the feeling that this search was about to take a turn he did not expect. Ending line. The man at the tea stall knew more than he was letting on, and Sundar was about to hear a truth that could change everything. Sundar walked slowly toward the tea stall, his curiosity sharpening with every step. The old man's eyes followed him until he stopped right in front of him. The tea stall was small, just a wooden counter with 2 benches, but it smelled of fresh ginger and cardamom. "You're looking for Anil," the man said before Sundar could even speak. His voice was rough, like someone who had spent a lifetime talking in crowded markets. Sundar's single quotes art skipped a beat. "Yes. Do you know him?" The man poured tea into a small glass and pushed it toward him. "I knew him when we were boys," he said. "We were in the same class as Narendra. I saw what happened that morning with the shoes. It was not just kindness, it was sacrifice. Anil's family could barely afford 1 pair for him, and yet he gave them away." Sundar leaned forward. "Where did his family go?" The man hesitated, staring into his tea. "That is not the simple part. They moved to Ahmedabad, but life was hard there. His father passed away when Anil was young. After that, no one knew exactly where he went. Some say he left school to work. Others say he left the city altogether." Sundar felt the trail slipping away again, but before he could ask more, the man added something unexpected. "You should know, not everyone remembers Anil kindly. There are whispers that later in life, he made choices that were not so noble." That caught Sundar off guard. "What do you mean?" The old man shook his head. "I don't know the full truth. But kindness does not always protect a person from hardship. Sometimes, the world changes them." He looked directly into Sundar's eyes. "If you find him, you might not find the same boy who gave away his shoes." Those words stayed with Sundar long after he left the stall. He had come here expecting to uncover a story of pure goodness, a simple thread of kindness running from the past into the present. But now, there was a shadow over it, a suggestion that the man Anil had become might not match the boy from Modi's memory. That night, in a small guesthouse room, Sundar lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He wondered if finding Anil was still the right thing to do. What if the truth disappointed Modi? What if the memory he cherished turned out to be nothing like the reality? But another thought came to him. If kindness is real, it does not disappear just because a life takes a hard turn. Maybe the act itself was enough, even if the man had changed. Still, Sundar knew one thing. He was too far into this search to stop now. And the next clue was waiting in a HedgeMed ABAD. Ending line. What Sundar did not know was that the road to Ahmedabad would lead him not just to Anil, but to a decision that would test the very meaning of kindness. The train to Ahmedabad rattled through the countryside, passing fields of wheat and small villages where life seemed unchanged for decades. Sundar sat by the window, watching the world blur past, but his mind was far away. He kept thinking about the old man's words. What if Anil had changed? What if finding him would destroy the beauty of Modi's memory? When he arrived, the city felt alive in a way that was almost overwhelming. The streets were crowded, shopkeepers shouted to passing customers, and the smell of fried snacks filled the air. Sundar went straight to the address given to him by the headmaster's old contacts, a small printing shop in a narrow lane. The shop was dimly lit, with stacks of paper piled in the corners. An older woman stood behind the counter. When Sundar asked about Anil, her expression shifted. "He used to work here," she said quietly, "but it has been many years since I saw him." She hesitated before continuing. "He lives on the edge of the city now. Life has not been easy for him. You should be prepared. He is not the man people remember from childhood." She wrote down an address on a piece of paper and slid it across the counter. Sundar thanked her and stepped back into the noise of the street, feeling a mix of anticipation and unease. The area where Anil now lived was very different from the bustling center of the city. The streets were narrow, lined with small, aging houses. Children played cricket with makeshift bats, and stray dogs dozed in the shade. When Sundar reached the address, he found a small, weathered home with peeling paint. Anil was sitting outside on a wooden chair. His hair was gray, his face lined with years of struggle. His clothes were worn, and his hands looked like they had seen hard labor. When he noticed Sundar, his eyes narrowed with caution. "Are you Anil?" Sundar asked gently. The man nodded slowly. "Yes, who are you?" Sundar introduced himself and explained why he had come. He spoke about Modi's memory, about the act of kindness that had stayed with him for decades. As he spoke, Anil's eyes softened, but there was also something heavy in his expression. Finally, Anil said, "I remember that day. I remember giving him my shoes, but my life after that. It was not a story worth telling. I made mistakes. I disappointed people. I am not the boy you came looking for." Sundar felt a deep ache in his chest. Here was the man who had once shown pure kindness, now weighed down by regret. But he also felt something else, an understanding that kindness was not about being perfect for a lifetime. It was about moments, and the courage to act in them. Ending line, Sundar realized the boy from Modi's memory was still here, buried under years of hardship, waiting for someone to see him again. For a long moment, Sundar just sat there in silence, watching Anil. The man's shoulders were slightly hunched, as if the weight of his past had bent them over the years. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small courtyard, and the distant sound of a street vendor's bell drifted through the air. "Anil," Sundar said softly, "the Prime Minister still remembers what you did. After all these years, that morning still lives in his heart. You gave away something you needed because you saw someone else's need as greater. That does not disappear, no matter what came after." Anil looked away, his voice rough. "But if he knew the rest of my life, would he still think of me the same way? I am not proud of the choices I made." Sundar leaned forward. "Life is not a straight path. We all stumble. But the value of a good act is not erased by the mistakes that follow. You were a boy who chose kindness when you could have looked away. That is the part he remembers, and that is the part that matters." Anil's eyes glistened, but he said nothing. When Sundar returned to Delhi a few days later, he was invited to meet Modi again. As they sat together in a quiet meeting room, Modi asked, "Did you find him?" Sundar took a deep breath. "Yes, I did. He is alive, living a quiet life. He remembers you, and he remembers that morning. His life has been hard, and he has faced struggles most people cannot imagine. But the kindness you remember, that was real. It is still real." Modi's eyes softened, and for a moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled faintly. "Sometimes, it is enough to know that the act happened. The boy gave me his shoes, and that gave me more than warmth. It gave me a belief in people. I will carry that belief until my last day." As Sundar left that meeting, he realized something important. The search had not been about proving that Anil was still perfect. It had been about understanding that kindness is not defined by a flawless life. It is defined by the moment it is given. And somewhere, in a small house on the edge of Ahmedabad, Anil sat quietly, not knowing that the boy he once was had just been remembered by one of the most powerful men in the world. Weeks passed after Sundar's meeting with Modi, but the story of Anil stayed with him. It wasn't just a memory anymore, it had become a reminder of something he couldn't ignore. Kindness, he realized, had to be nurtured, especially when the world tried to bury it under years of struggle. One morning, Sundar made a quiet decision. Without telling Modi, he returned to Ahmedabad. The small house looked the same, peeling paint, the old wooden chair outside, and Anil sitting in it, watching the street, as if waiting for something that never came. Anil was surprised to see him again. "You came back?" he asked, almost in disbelief. "I did," Sundar replied. "And this time, I'm not here to ask questions. I'm here to tell you something." He sat beside Anil and told him that Modi still cherished that morning, that even in the highest office of the country, a single act of kindness from decades ago still guided his decisions. "You may feel your life has been full of mistakes," Sundar said, "but to someone else, you are still the boy who gave away his shoes. You changed how he saw the world." Anil's eyes welled up. For a moment he seemed to lose the years of hardship, and the boy from Vadnagar was there again, smiling shyly. Then Sundar reached into his bag and handed him a pair of new shoes. Not expensive, not flashy, but strong and warm. "These are not for repayment," he said. "They are a reminder that your kindness still matters." Anil held them in his hands, unable to speak. The street was quiet, except for the sound of children playing in the distance. Before leaving, Sundar added one last thing. "Sometimes the world forgets to thank us. Sometimes we even forget ourselves. But acts of kindness don't vanish, they wait for the right moment to return." When Sundar later met Modi again, he didn't tell him about the visit or the shoes. Some stories, he thought, are meant to live quietly in the hearts of those who share them. And somewhere in Ahmedabad, Anil wore his new shoes and walked a little lighter, carrying with him the truth that his kindness had crossed decades, cities, and lives.